So we could all bow in. So welcome everyone to the Path of Awakening class on Mingyur Rinpoche's book, In Love with the World. Begin tonight by talking about chapters 21 and 22, which are titled No Picking, No Choosing, and Working with Pain. Both these chapters have a connection with some of what we talked about last week, and when we talked about Mingyur Rinpoche's instruction to the very fortunate person who ran into him in the cremation stupa grounds and was able to receive instruction about working with thoughts in meditation practice. And there's a similarity or a continuity with that, with the two chapters tonight. But just as a reminder, just to read a couple of sections from, again, Mingyur Rinpoche's other book, Turning Confusion into Clarity, where he talks about working with thoughts, just because the principles are the same. He says, normally our monkey mind is in the driver's seat. And I think we see this when we practice, that it's, we have the intention to stay present, but we get distracted, we fall into dreams, we get lost in stories, lost in internal dialogue. So normally our monkey mind is in the driver's seat. One thought leads to another, and we can't stop them, and often they drive us crazy. When we cultivate awareness, we no longer fall into the river. Awareness itself allows us to stand at the river's edge without getting sucked into the current. We're liberated from the tyranny of the monkey mind. Thoughts are still there. They may be quiet or turbulent, focused or wild and scattered, but we've stopped identifying with them. We've become the awareness, not the thoughts. With the recognition of awareness, we can stand back and watch thoughts and know that we are watching them. We no longer need to get rid of them because they are no longer pushing us around. Identifying with our natural awareness and not the thoughts dissolve their destructive power. So, what he's talking about here is changing our ordinary relationship with our thoughts, with our thinking process, with our conceptual mind, which is ordinarily to follow one thought after another, or to go even further, to actually identify with a thought and take it to be real and take it as saying something about ourselves. And this is one of the reasons why early on in the book he spent so much time asking us to contemplate on the reality of impermanence, that things change all the time. And that in particular, if we look at our moment-to-moment experience, which is what meditation helps us do, we realize that thoughts aren't so solid, aren't so real, and that we don't have to identify with them, that the identification itself is a further thought that we get locked into. So with the two chapters we're going to be talking about tonight, he kind of expands on how we might work with what we encounter in meditation, and expands our sense of what we could work with in meditation in a similar way to what he talked about in terms of talking with thoughts. So the first chapter was no picking, no choosing. And he says right from the beginning, because in this chapter he's going to begin dealing with the fact that he's run out of money, and he's going to begin living a very nomadic life, and living much in the way that monks lived in the time of the Buddha, where they were expected to beg for food, and this was a recommended practice in the time of the Buddha, precisely for dealing with pride and arrogance and learning to let go. So monks were expected to beg in the time of the Buddha. And what he says, what Mingyur Rinpoche says, is accepting whatever goes into your alms bowl is a huge challenge to the ego's addiction to picking and choosing. So again, as we'll see in this chapter and the next, it's, as he talks about in great detail in the next chapter, it's another reversing practice in a sense. It works against the logic and the feelings. It goes against the grain of ego and highlights the way in which, again, ego has an addiction. It's caught up. It's get very reactive about picking and choosing, wanting what's pleasant, wanting to reject what's unpleasant, and trying to build some kind of cocoon of security in that way that ultimately leads to suffering. And he begins actually with this no picking, no choosing by contemplating how the Buddha accepted Kunda's offering. You remember Kunda in the last chapter, maybe the chapter before, referred to Kunda as a person who served the Buddha food that ultimately turned out to be poisonous. Now, the Buddha had already predicted his upcoming death, his parinirvana. And he died at age 80, so it was not a short life, especially considering the time. But in any case, he accepted Kunda's offering, knowing it was poisonous. And Mingyur Rinpoche contemplates this and says, what was his teaching? What was he teaching? Was he teaching no picking and choosing, even at the risk of one's life? Or did he choose to predict Kunda over himself? And we could look even further to contemplate what the meaning of the Buddha's action might have been. Was it a teaching about impermanence? Was it a teaching about fearlessness and acceptance in the face of death? But ultimately, what we run into is the Buddha's actions are unknowable. That Buddha's, has certainly been true of my experience with other teachers, is that some things make immediate sense, but there are a lot of situations in which, because they're so open, that they see more in present causes and conditions and see more in terms of possibilities for the future, that sometimes we don't know why Buddha does or doesn't do the things that a Buddha does or doesn't do. And sometimes it just takes time for the actions of a Buddha to ripen. And I'm thinking about this not only of the Buddha, but Trungpa Rinpoche and all the many other teachers that we've encountered. In any case, having contemplated a little bit this idea of no picking, no choosing, he enters the restaurant where he had been buying dal, rice and lentils before, to beg for the first time. And he says this is a struggle. This was not easy for him. His breathing became more erratic and more intense. He felt like he was inhaling as if to kind of inflate his self-assurance. And as he says, just to ask loomed as the critical test of the retreat, the defining moment that would complete the passage to the homeless life, the moment that would skewer my pride, test my humility, and measure my desire. And he had vowed to eat whatever was given, not to refuse an offering of meat. He said he wouldn't starve to death to protect his own preferences. He said, of course, that it was easy to take whatever was offered when he was in his monastery and being served his favorite food. But as a wandering monk, he would have to accept whatever he was given, which again is just as it was for monks in the time of the Buddha. So he's given up his Tibetan robes, and he's dressed now as a sadhu. So he has no longer the maroon robes, red robes, and is now dressed in saffron, yellow-orange robes. And when the people in the restaurant first see him, they address him as Babaji, which is a term for an Indian holy man. And with great difficulty, he managed to say, "My money is finished. Can you please give me something to eat?" And he said the manager didn't show any surprise or disdain. It felt like the manager of the restaurant seemed to be used to begging, which is very likely because, again, there's a level of poverty in India that's beyond what we can imagine if we haven't really been there. And told him to return that evening. So Mingyur Rinpoche felt this was a big step, but with mixed results, that he felt humiliated by the process and hungry, and felt naked in his robe, but was also happy that he'd been able to finally ask, that he'd overcome some kind of barrier, some kind of holding on to pride. He went back to the stupa and asked the person who had sold him roast corn if he could give him something to eat, and he was refused. But again, he felt, even though he was dismayed that he'd been refused, he felt he had put another puncture in the fabric of old customs. So he returned to the grove and again was contemplating his experience, looking at, recognizing what was in his mind and contemplating that. And then he saw that he had taken the refusals of food personally. And he begins to contemplate this. And he says, "What craziness. I'm working to take off the ego hats, to know they're not real, to know my monk's role is not real. And yet some version of me felt stung by not getting what I asked for. Who is this? Spoiled baby Mingyur Rinpoche? Esteemed abbot? What difference would it make? None. It's all gone. It's all emptiness, all delusion." And he goes on again to talk about how to have, basically what he's talking about is to have had this feeling of taking it personally. He had to still be holding on to some sense of self. There had to be a self who could take it personally. And he calls this the endless misperception of mistaking this collection of labels, this designation, as real. Because that's how, meaning that because how we identify with ourselves, there has to be some kind of solidification of identification in order to have taken it personally. And upon reflection, he realizes this is empty. This is the craziness. Why, on what basis am I feeling humiliated or embarrassed or whatever? On what basis am I taking this as a personal rejection when I know there is no self? And this is essentially what he's working through in his mind. This is what he's contemplating. Where did this feeling come from? And he says, when we actually reflect in this way, we realize that that because the self doesn't exist, there's nothing real to receive these arrows of rejection, arrows of embarrassment, the arrows. Because of our essentially empty nature, he says the hurt we experience is self-inflicted. In other words, we have to create the self, we have to identify with the self, grasp onto the self, that then we feel offended by or rejected or humiliated or whatever. We create the target as well as the arrows. So this is what he means by taking personally, and the experience of taking personally, that it rather than giving in to a flood of emotion and storyline and dreams about rejection and embarrassment and so on, it begins to actually look at his experience. So this is perhaps even more difficult than just simply looking at the arising of thoughts. Now he's actually looking at the arising of emotions and an entire storyline and what that arises out of taking oneself to be real. And when we recognize this is what's happening, then we have the opportunity to actually look at our experience and perhaps let go. So for us, it might not be, it's not likely to be, that we're going to go into a restaurant and beg, because that's just not something that works well in our culture. But that any kind of setback, disagreement, any aggression that we experience, any encounter that we could realize the illusory nature of, and realize that by taking something personally, by taking ourselves to be real in some way that we're not, that we create the target, that the hurt, and then the hurt we experience is self-inflicted. So with this, he begins talking about meditation. And again, he reiterates, says again, what we talked about last week, that basically all meditations work with awareness. The essence of meditation is recognizing and staying with awareness. If we lose our awareness, we're not meditating. And for a lot of what I have to say tonight, if we could keep that in mind, that the essence of meditation is awareness, it's a lot easier to understand what he's talking about. Because again, whatever we experience happens within the greater space of awareness. This is true of thoughts, as we talked about last week. It's true of emotions. And in the next chapter, it's even true of physical sensations and physical pain. He goes on to say that awareness is like a crystal or mirror that reflects different colors and angles, and that all we experience, every form or sight, sound, smells, thoughts, emotions, he says, quote, are different aspects of awareness and exist within awareness. So the analogy of a mirror is used quite a bit in, actually even in the certain forms of Mahayana, but definitely in Dzogchen and Mahamudra traditions. That the mirror reflects things just as they are, that the mirror accepts whatever is reflected within it, that the mirror itself is empty, and that a mirror doesn't necessarily have a fixed color or shape or qualities of its own, that it's not changed by whatever reflects in it, and that it's always, it's ever present. It continuously reflects whatever is put in front of the mirror. And all of these are used for analogies for understanding something of the empty nature of awareness. And then the images themselves, the quality, the ability to reflect, represents, it was used as an analogy for just fundamental awareness, first thought, first complete openness to whatever we experience. So it's a very common analogy. But he also uses another analogy that I thought was interesting. He says you might view awareness as a guest house, that every type of traveler, and remember, he uses the word traveler. Remember that the idea here is that whatever experience, because traveler is another way of talking, actually hinting at impermanence again, change, that things come and go. But every type of traveler passes through the guest house. Sensations, perceptions, emotions, everything. And everything is welcome. Again, just like the mirror, it doesn't reject anything. At least on the level of first thought, first experience, there's complete openness. Now, afterward, we may have all kinds of judgments, and we may try to push away or grasp or whatever, but in the first moment of awareness, it's complete openness. Nothing is rejected. He says sometimes the traveler causes a little trouble and needs some special help. And for Mingyur Rinpoche, these in particular were some of the feelings of physical hunger, but also the feelings of vulnerability, shyness, rejection, embarrassment. He says we're asking for attention. He said embarrassment might be subtler than anger, but its impact on the body can be almost as great. He says the intention when meditating with emotion, and this is where it's difficult, and this is where shamatha practice is so helpful, because it's through shamatha that we develop the steadiness and flexibility of mind. The intention when meditating with emotion is to stay steady with every sensation. It's to stay with awareness, stay with the recognition of awareness. Just as we do with sound meditation, meditation on sound, which is not something we typically practice, but it could be. You could actually work with the visual object as your object of meditation. We work with the breath as an object of meditation, something to come back to. But you could use a visual form. You could use a sound if there's a fairly continuous sound. You just come back to the sensation of sound. Sound is happening now. The visual form is present before you now. Same idea. Just as we do with sound meditation, just listening, just feeling, no commentary, resting the mind on the breath can turn the breath into support for maintaining recognition of awareness. So this is the idea. With shamatas, we made some steadiness so that we can stay in awareness, maintaining recognition of awareness. The same with anger, rejection, embarrassment. So that actually even these emotions, even the kleshas, can be worked with in this way. Just by simply being aware of their presence, not acting on them, not pushing them away, not acting out and not stuffing away. And he says at first he tried to connect with the embarrassment, which is the particular emotion that he was feeling because it was the dominant feeling. So he first just tried to stay with the experience of embarrassment, stay with the experience of emotion, stay steady. And then he begins to investigate, where is this embarrassment and how is it manifesting in the body? And again, he says, not trying to stop it, not trying to change it, not grasping, just seeing it with inquisitiveness. And he begins to notice bodily sensations, the feeling of being drawn down. And with this, he began to notice the resistance to the feeling. And he says he had to make this resistance to the feeling the object of awareness. He says to himself, I don't like these sensations. I started off feeling bad, and now added to that, I feel bad about feeling bad. So he says slowly, he brought each sensation into the guest house of awareness. So again, it's staying with the recognition of awareness, even as he's experiencing the emotion. I let go of resistance, let go of negativity, and tried to just rest with feeling small, unloved, unworthy. And again, the important thing here is letting go isn't pushing away. It's actually more like letting be without engaging. It's accommodating without interfering, without contrivance. And then he says, quote, the guest house of awareness encompassed the feelings and became bigger than all of them together, dwarfing their impact, changing the relationship. Changing the relationship, I think we could understand in a lot of different ways. What he might mean there. One is not fighting with the experience, trying to make it different. But the other is not identifying with the experience, not identifying with the emotion, not identifying with the experience and saying, this is me. And this happens as awareness becomes bigger than the sensation, bigger than the emotion, bigger than the thought, bigger than the storyline. And he does this for quite a while. He says, I continued doing this for several hours, and came to see that feeling bad was just another guest passing through. There was no reason to ask it to leave, but my mind could now accept it. From that acceptance, a distinct feeling of contentment pervaded his body. So he was able to relax with the experience and just have it become yet one more thing in the greater space of awareness. And he says he went back to the restaurant and got some leftover rice and dal. And he said it was more delicious than any meal he had eaten at 5-star hotels. And then he returns to the cremation stupa and actually spends his first night outside. So before he had stayed in the guest house or in the dormitory at the Varanasi train station. But now he's out of money and he sleeps outside. And with this, he begins thinking, he realizes that having spent the last of his money, that it actually severed the lifeline that as he says, that could have reeled him back to safety, food, and shelter, that this line had been broken. And he has some mixed feelings about this. And on the one hand, he felt adrift. He felt I could no longer afford to reject anything, not the food given or the bed he now had, which was a bed outside. But at the same time, he liked this. He felt that this was a true beginning of his retreat. That sleeping outside alone, the ground for his bed, begging for food. On the one hand, he felt he could die here, but on the other hand, it was leading to greater awareness. He says, all my life I had been in the presence of others, but hadn't recognized the cushioned depth of protection they provided. He knew that people had responsibility to take care of him. Now he had even more delicate sense of how these bodies, these people taking care of him, were like a chain link fence to form a protective shield around him, and that this was now gone. More vulnerability, more throwing, as casting his fate to the winds in a sense. He said despite his yearning to be self-sufficient, his experience in Varanasi had shown him how much he had taken his life for granted, that he'd walked alone, taken the train alone, and he felt stripped and says the absence of the shield that he'd had came into focus slowly. And even more so, he has this experience sleeping outside. He said sleeping outside, the feelings of vulnerability and embarrassment were like riptides rather than undercurrents, and he felt seized by the full weight of solitude, of loneliness, of being far from safety. He said he realized that he'd been taking this invisible shield for granted so completely he hadn't been able to see it. And I think perhaps from time to time we have experiences like that too, maybe not as dramatic and as powerful, but where we kind of realize that something we've taken for granted isn't as solid and permanent as we thought, or that we become more dependent on a way of being and seeing things than we thought. In any case, he really longed for this world that he was in, this brave new world that he was in, to feel hospitable, but it didn't. That in fact he felt very uncomfortable, foreign, felt like a misfit. He says, the ground does not accept my body. The mosquitoes were biting, the dogs were more hostile than they had been during the day. But even still, between these bouts of intense disorientation, his mind continued to comment on the wondrous triumph of pulling off his plan, marveling at actually being there. And as he says, throughout that sleepless night, I vacillated between distress and delight and welcomed the first hint of dawn. So, waves and waves of emotion, and throughout maintaining his awareness. Now, working with pain, which is the next chapter, introduces another element, because he says he started having stomach cramps, which weren't severe at first, and he thought would go away. And he began his usual sequence of meditation and awareness practices, but the cramps began to become more painful. So he just began with a simple practice of resting the mind, just settling the mind. And then he did his best to expand the practice to include working with pain. And with this we begin some contemplation of the nature of pain as a meditation practice. Again, the point here, well, we'll come to that. He says the good news about pain is that it cries out for attention. If you place your mind on pain, you know where your mind is, and this is certainly true. The trick is to stay aware of the mind. And he says what happens is that's not what we usually do. Usually we try to just get rid of pain so that pain becomes an object outside of mind, or at least seems to be outside of mind, to be ejected. So we have, and he says this is the counterintuitive aspect of pain, that when we meet pain with resistance, the pain doesn't diminish. Instead, we add suffering to pain. This is an even more elaborate description of what we talked about in the previous chapter about how by creating a sense of self, we create a target that then, so that hurt is self-inflicted. In this case, there's some kind of pain to begin with, but the suffering that comes along with it is greatly increased by a kind of a similar process. He says, when we meet pain with resistance, the pain doesn't diminish. Instead, we add suffering to pain. That pain arises in the body, but the negative reaction to pain arises in the mind of the fixed self and transforms physical pain into an enemy into an enemy. When we try to get rid of pain, we pit ourselves against ourselves, becoming war zones, not an environment best suited for healing. In other words, when we relate to pain in this way, as something external to mind that we want to eject, what we do is we create a solid self, we create a solid sense of pain, and we create a solid relationship between the two based on trying to push away this experience. And then to add more suffering, self-pity, he says self-pity attaches to sickness like glue. Why me? Or poor me? He doesn't say this, but for some people it becomes even more self-aggressive. I deserve this. This is what I get. And all of this just increases the suffering that we experience in the relation, with this mistaken relationship with pain. And he says, yet this voice does not reside with the pain in the body, but with the mind that identifies with the pain. So he begins talking about having practiced pain meditation as part of the 3-year retreat that he did. And he says that since it's hard to initiate this type of practice with intense pain, it's important to develop the ability to work with pain before actually needing to meditate in that way. So the idea was to work with pain in times of good health. And he describes this as critical preparation for aging and dying, since the odds of physical difficulties increase with age. And we know this is true. So the idea of pain meditation, of working with pain in the context of meditation practice, is to develop some ability not to get into this I against other struggle with pain, but to be able to settle with pain and see pain and let go of pain as best we can, which he will be talking about in some detail in a moment in this chapter. He says pain meditation comes under the category of reverse meditation. And reverse here means that we deliberately invite whatever is unwanted and unwelcome. So, for instance, in Tonglen practice, those of us who do Tonglen, we deliberately bring in the suffering of others, the pain of others that we don't want, and we let go of or try to send out something positive and good, which is normally what we'd hold on to. So you could think of Tonglen as reversing the ordinary logic of ego. If we normally, as he says, and we work with this even in terms of the places and ways in which we do meditation practice, that we actually invite what's unwanted and unwelcome. This is similar to what he talked about in the first section of the book, adding wood to the fire. He says if we normally associate breathing meditation with a peaceful landscape, instead we practice, as he did, in a low-class Indian train car or at a rock concert. I just want to emphasize at this point that these are not beginning practices, that it's important to know the context under which he's talking about some of these things, such as that this is a practice done during a 3-year retreat. So I think, speaking for myself at least, I don't feel the need to go out and create any pain, but when pain arises, I try to keep in mind some of the things that he's talking about here. And I'm talking about in sitting meditation for the back, maybe back hurts or something like that. It doesn't mean that you don't try to do something to make yourself comfortable, but you don't have to struggle with the pain, which is the part that he's making. And in fact, when I've done longer periods of meditation, such as the Datun, which was a month long. At one point, physical pain was intense, and at some point I was able to let go. And I can't say it felt good, but clearly having a change in the relationship to pain made a difference, and it became much more workable, bearable. Anyway, he says that when practicing pain meditation in the monastery, they learned harmless methods to experience pain, like digging fingernails into the thighs or biting the lip. And he said this was done not to an extreme, not to draw blood. And the instruction very specifically was to stop once there was some acknowledgement of an unpleasant sensation. So the idea is just to see it without adding anything to it. It's the idea of just simply seeing the experience, seeing how the mind works with that experience. And in a sense, his entire wandering retreat was a reverse meditation. He certainly has deliberately invited trouble. And he goes on to say that a common metaphor for the entire Buddhist path is swimming against the stream. And this refers to the reverse aspect of all mind training. He talks about, for instance, that in a noisy materialistic society, just sitting down and being quiet is a reverse activity. To devote even an hour a day to becoming nobody in the world, where everyone strives to be somebody, like in social media influencers, reverses what's ordinarily socially rewarded goals. To aspire that all beings be happy and free of suffering runs counter to self-centered preoccupations. He says when we investigate reverse, it can become a foundational principle for guiding daily life situations. It can be used to cut through mindless behavior loops and for using disruption to wake us up from sleepwalking. And he gives us another example, the contemplation of death rather than avoiding death. And he says with this, it's not that we deny or reject the sadness of death, the heartbreak that we and the people we love will die, but that by working with this, actually contemplating rather than avoiding, that the fear and perplexity that surrounds this ordinary trauma are not inevitable. By facing our fear of the future, we can transform our present. So, coming back to the stomach cramps and the pain that he's experiencing, he says he started to meditate on pain by directing his mind to the sensations of stomach cramps, then letting it rest there. So again, it's just being steady with the experience, similar to what we talked about in relation to working with thoughts and emotions. Just be with the sensation, he says. Just be with the sensation of pain. No acceptance, no rejection, just feeling. Explore the sensation. Kind of a first thought, what is the experience? And he says, don't get caught in the story about the cramps. Just feel them. And then after a few moments, after he was able to settle and just be in that experience without, as best he could, just seeing what arose and seeing through, staying in awareness, basically, he started to investigate. Again, this is like, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say, look further, inquisitiveness. What is the quality of this feeling? Where does it reside? And he says with this, he began to move his mind from the surface to the stomach and asking himself, who's having this pain? Is this one of his esteemed roles? Is this Mingyur Rinpoche? Is this a beggar? Well, no matter what, he says, they're only concepts, and the pain itself is a concept. It's a mental experience. And he says again, stay in the awareness beyond concept. Let the self beyond self accommodate both concepts and non-concepts. That pain is just a cloud passing through the mind of awareness. Cramped stomach pain are all intense forms of awareness. And again, stay with the awareness and become bigger than the pain. He says that in awareness like sky, in other words, very big meditate, very big awareness like sky, there's no place for the concepts to abide. Concepts come and go. Let it come and go. Who holds the pain? And he says if you become one with the pain, there is no one to hurt. It's just a concentrated sensation that we label pain. No one holds the pain. This is, again, his contemplation and investigation of the experience. What happens when no one holds the pain? It's just pain. Not even that, for pain is just the label. And again, comes back to feel the sensation. Just in the moment experience, beyond concept yet present, nothing extra. Experience it, let it be. And then, This is then he says he returned to just resting his mind in open awareness. And in this sense, it's very much like visualization practice, certainly the analytic practices in Mahamudra. There's a period of effort and there's a period of complete letting go, and just looking at what the experience is. And this is what he's doing here, is just resting his mind in open awareness. He goes on to say that whether we train the mind by using our breath or using pain, thoughts, whatever, by doing compassion, every practice is about waking up and becoming conscious of a universal reality that transcends the contents of our individual minds. As with a crystal or mirror, awareness has the ability to reflect, even if no object exists to be reflected. This is mere awareness. So now he's talking about, even if no object exists, the mirror has this capacity for reflecting. Just as even if there's no object of awareness, awareness has the capacity to be aware, to be knowing, aware. And he says this is mere awareness. We could call it the essence of mind. The capacity for knowing, regardless of objects of reflection. Through intense meditation or other ways of liberating or letting go of the conceptual mind, we can access mere awareness without perceiving its reflection. It's just knowingness itself. This is the luminosity aspect of mind, the knowing recognition of awareness. And this is what he means by resting in open mere awareness, just this capacity of mind for knowing, clarity, luminosity. And he says one reason for having different meditation exercises is that prolonged engagement with one relative facet of the crystal can grow stale. So we refresh mind by moving to a different facet. So he says, when overwhelmed by pain or emotions, we should take a break, have a cup of tea, walk around the block, or try a different approach. But most importantly, not give up. But we can shift focus. We could work with work with meditation on the breath, meditation on the visual object, meditation on sound. And he says with this, he felt grateful for his awareness practice. And then to summarize, he says normal pain is solid and static and arises in a mind that's stuck in a negative attitude about pain. The recognition of awareness can hold the pain without taking a position or adding a story, which makes it easier for pain to lessen or move on. He says we can't change the pain directly, but we can change our relationship to it, and this can reduce suffering. Just as changing our relationship to our thoughts, not identifying with them, not clinging to them, not following one thought after another in mindless distraction, this can also reduce suffering. He talked very briefly about a friend in Bagaya who going through a painful divorce and had tried climbing a tree to get into the house that he was locked out of, but fell and broke his foot. And he said he actually loved the pain, that it draws, the friend said, it draws the suffering out of my head. Now I know where the pain is and how to treat it. I can think clearly again. Anyway, he then says that he began having bouts of diarrhea, and he kept telling himself this is normal. He went back to get more food. He said the restaurant manager asked if he's okay. He said he was fine, but he knew he wasn't. He was exhausted by the walk back to the stupa, and spent again a very difficult night with stomach, with all kinds of gastrointestinal upset. But he said he felt cheered by the light of a new day, which is where the chapter ends. So with that, turn it over to John.
Okay. Trying to figure out how to change the picture.
Shouldn't be any need, John.
What?
I think it's okay. It doesn't need to be changed.
I'm looking at the text of the talk. There we go. Okay. Thank you, Michael. So these chapters are all about Mingyur Rinpoche giving up his privileged position, circumstance as abbot of Tergar Monastery and becoming completely ordinary and experiencing the ordinariness of what it means to be a human being. Chapter 23 is the next chapter, the Four Rivers of Natural Suffering. On day 3 of his outside adventure, he found himself circling among the bushes, the pump, and his little encampment. The scorching heat kept visitors away, and he was thankful for the privacy. He remained optimistic, and his body was still able to sit in formal meditation posture. By midday, he had to acknowledge to himself that he was losing strength, and he started to worry. Less and less able to move, he began sitting with his back against the wall. You see, he's given up all of the props, supports, privileges of being Mingyur Rinpoche, the famous abbot. And now he's encountering the physical weakness of his body and the difficulty of his circumstances. He still didn't take his illness too seriously, but he began to think, at least there's no place better to die than right here, where the Buddha died. What a fantastic coincidence. If these cramps get worse, I might die with pain, but with the blessings of this place. The Buddha had died there from food poisoning. So far, he hadn't taken the possibility of dying seriously. Now, suddenly, he thought maybe being here was not coincidental. Perhaps he had been drawn here to die. Perhaps his dreams of death were prophetic. Anything is possible. Mingyur Rinpoche then recalled a story he had heard about a man who almost died happily visiting the Potala Palace in Lhasa from Kham. When Mingyur Rinpoche returned to his sitting spot from frequent trips to the bushes, where he would go to pee, piss, throw up, whatever he was doing, before sitting down, he would turn and face the stupa, concentrating on it as if coaxing his eyes into X-ray vision. He wished to see what really remained and what had died. The Buddha had died, but I am also the Buddha, and that guard is Buddha, that dog is Buddha, you are Buddha, even the stupa is Buddha. If we are all Buddhas, not separate from Buddha with a capital B, who dies? Whatever happens to my body, I am dying. I've been dying from the day I was born. This is true of all of us. We just don't acknowledge it or pay attention to it. Something continued after the Buddha's body died. Will something continue if I die, here at the cremation site alone, with no friend to help me? Here he is. Can you imagine the aloneness of this? I had enough discipline to return to resting with awareness when my mind drifted, but with more frequency it drifted into fear of dying. Yet in my bones I still rejected this outcome. In such a situation, those dearest to you come to mind, and you passionately wish for them to know how much you love them before the plane goes down or whatever, and you die. He thought of a woman whose husband had died on a construction site by accident. She'd been raised Catholic and believed that each of us has our time here on earth and accepted that for whatever mysterious reason, his time had come to an end. But she remained haunted by not having told him how much she loved him. And how many stories have we heard about people who have had death experiences of their own or of those close to them and regretted not having taken advantage of the time they had. Many hospice workers have similar regrets, that love had not been expressed enough when the chance existed. A student told him that when her mother lay dying, her mother had told her, "Tell everyone you love that you love them. Don't wait until you are dying." Interesting advice for all of us. I wondered if Mother and Tsoknyi Rinpoche and my grandpa and Tai Situ Rinpoche knew how much I loved them. Mingyur Rinpoche, speaking, loving his mother and Sukni Rinpoche, who was his older brother, and his grandpa, Tulku Ujin, and Taisitu Rinpoche. I prayed for these and other people every day. I reviewed my efforts to secure the protection of all the people I cared for at this monastery in Kathmandu and elsewhere. Mingyur had said his farewells and had prepared extensively. His mother and other family members and friends would feel so sad if he died. But then he thought, sooner or later, we will all die. The man who fell from the building was not in control of when he would die, and neither am I. But why hadn't it occurred to me that I might die? How ignorant to have taken my life for granted. Don't we all take our lives for granted until that moment comes? But the motivation was to be reborn in a form that could be of greater help to others. If I maintain the same motivation at the time of physical death, and the same will hold true. That means not getting distracted by pain or by regret or by self-pity, but to stay focused on helping others. Shakyamuni Buddha spoke of 4 rivers of natural suffering: birth, aging, sickness, and death. The inevitable difficulties of life. But they can be experienced without extras, without compounding the suffering, with storylines that solidify our misperceptions about reality. There is a teaching, a story about the Buddhist time, about how a young woman who comes to him, the Buddha, with her dead child, asking for him to resuscitate the child. This is a famous story. If you've read the Buddha's life, you will have read it. She has come in search of a miracle cure. The Buddha tells her to return to her village and to collect 1 mustard seed from each household that has never known death, and then to bring these seeds to him. Of course, she returns with no seeds at all and asks the Buddha, is there another way? The Buddha says, you cannot find a way to restore the life of your baby, but you can learn to live with death, to make yourself bigger than this loss. Then you can hold the sadness and not drown in its sorrow. The next chapter is called Recalling the Bardos. And you'll remember that the Bardos are intervals. There are 6 main Bardos. There's the bardo of this life, which begins when you're born, when you exit your mother's womb, and ends as you begin to die, and how your body begins to fall apart. And this is called the bardo of this life. And within this bardo of this life, there are 2 subsidiary bardos. The bardo of dream, which is when you begin to dream, and beginning and duration and end of dream. And forgetting this second one. The bardo of pain, of suffering. And then the other 3 bardos have to do with death. He begins the 3rd day of his outdoor experiment by trying to go to the restaurant and beg for more food. But he's too weak, with his legs caving in. Leaning against the wall, breathing heavily, he recalled that at the time of dying, one of the first signs of irreversible decline is the experience of heaviness, the dissolution of the earth element. And there are these 5 elements: earth, air, water, fire, and space. Or sometimes it's called earth, air, water, fire, space, consciousness. And what these 5 elements are, they don't really exist as elements like iron or copper or whatever, magnesium. What they are is the fundamental qualities of life, of experience. Earth is the heaviness of this, that it's solid, heavy, Water is its fluidity, that things are constantly changing. This mouth is moving, words are coming out, and so forth. Air is motion, that things are in motion, changing all the time. Fire is the heat, the warmth of life. And consciousness is this space through which everything moves. So it's the fundamental 5 qualities of this world. So he imagines that the first sign of irreversible decline, when you start to die, is the experience of heaviness. You start to feel heavy. Things don't change and move as easily as they did. We know about the retraction of the senses when falling asleep. The 5 elements also dissolve night after night during sleep. All of them. But this happens so subtly that very few people can remain aware of the process. However, at the time of dying, the dissolution of the elements becomes as pronounced as the dissolution of the senses. In fact, they're really the same. And we can directly experience the disidentification of form from consciousness. The elements of our body have 5 qualities: solidity, fluidity, warmth, movement, and openness. In the Buddhist tradition, these 5 qualities are referred to as the 5 elements: earth, water, fire, air or wind, and space. These elements make up all phenomena. At the end of our lives, the dissolution of the elements can be observed by bedside caregivers and experienced by the dying. Some people feel as if they are falling when drifting off, as in falling asleep. A sense of gravity pulling them down, which arises from the dissolution of the earth element. The sensation of floating suggests that the dissolution of the water element, and we feel thirsty. The body dries out, lips become parched, skin feels dry, mucus congeals. The water element is disappearing. When the fire element dissolves into air at the time of dying, we cannot retain heat. The extremities turn cold, although the heart continues to stay warm and the mind feels like it's burning. Inhaling air or wind keeps everything in motion. As the air element dissolves, breathing becomes labored. This is all the process of dying. Space is the foundational reality of all phenomena and accommodates everything, including our bodies. Without space, we cannot have the other elements. The elements are not to be taken too literally. This dissolution of the elements as we fall asleep or as we die faintly parallels the same process when we die. In both sleep and dying, each element is absorbed into the next, so that at the end, space dissolves into itself. Or put another way, space dissolves into consciousness. His mind drifted toward those Bardo teachings that describe how to prepare for dying and what happens to the body and the mind when we die. But Mingyur Rinpoche's motivation was not strong enough to stay with specific teachings. The instructions came in and went out like a tide, forward and away. He continued to assume that the infection would run its course, rage like a fire until it extinguished itself, and that any minute cramps would seize with less severity. Now he saw that the beggars suffered from poor quality of the food and the attack on their bodies. He still did not realize that he was losing more water than taking in, and that severe dehydration was setting in for him. One day while he was traveling in Europe, he spoke to a friend in India who was very sick with stomach cancer and dying. His friend told him that he had no regrets, that all his life he had meditated on impermanence and trained in Bardo, these intervals, and was ready and not to worry. But his friend asked him to pray for his body. Even though he was not afraid to die physically, his attainment had not transcended his body. We're all so attached to these things. This is an example that while our minds can transcend fear of death, our bodies cannot transcend physical pain. Mingyur says of his father, Tulku Ujun Rinpoche, that even though he was not afraid to die physically, his attainment had not transcended his body. As long as we use our conceptual mind to relate to our flesh and blood bodies and use our sense organs to negotiate relative reality, we will experience physical pain. His father was quite different. As he became sicker and closer to death, one of his sons tried to talk him into traveling to a warmer and healthier climate, Thailand or Malaysia. But Tulku Ujun refused and said, "It looks like I am sick, but actually, there is no real conceptual body anymore. I feel fine. Whatever happens, whether it is my time to go or to stay, is okay. I am not suffering." We could take this to heart. The recognition of luminosity is the experience of dying before we die, dying within the bardo of this life. This is the recognition of luminosity, of coming completely awake, aware of emptiness, of shunyata, that none of this actually exists, and yet it's luminous, it's pink, it's black, it has sound, it has smell, taste, all of that. When this happens, the fled and blushed body no longer functions as the filter or anchor of the mind. Although the body will look ordinary to the ordinary observer, for an awakened mind, the body has become what we call an illusory body. It is no longer real in any conventional sense, but exists to an awakened mind more like a reflection, like a hologram. In this state, although other people will perceive a life that is ending, no one who has woken up to their own deathless emptiness, one who has woken up to their own deathless emptiness will not experience dying as a final ending, only as a transition into something else. And this is what we have to look forward to. To train in bardo means becoming familiar with the continuous process of dying. I had trained, but was not close to my father's attainment and had not gone beyond the understanding of my brother monk. I assumed that my friend had meant that during this lifetime, in the bardo of this life, he had become familiar with recognizing the vast mind of awareness, the mind that is unborn and cannot die, and that he had developed confidence in the continuity of his mind after death. We were introduced to this view by our classical training, but his conceptual mind had still kept his body intact. He had not yet known the illusory body as my father had, as his Mingyur Rinpoche's father had. When we accept that we are dying every day and that living cannot be separated from dying, it's happening now. Then the bardos offer a map of the mind during this lifetime. Each stage offers invaluable guidance for how to live every day. Nothing in the bardo texts relates exclusively to physical dying. Every transformation at every stage has already happened again and again in this life. Once we apply the bardo cycle to our daily lives, then we can see that all our efforts to wake up relate to change, impermanence, death, and rebirth. The essential markers of the bardo map. Change, or these five, I'm missing one. No, change, impermanence, death, and rebirth. The essential markers of the bardo map. This is the markers of reality. When I learned meditation as part of the monastic curriculum, it was not presented as bardo training. Neither were the exercises on impermanence and dying, nor the meditations on loving kindness and compassion. Yet, once I studied the bardo texts, I understood that all my training was an immersion in bardo wisdom. For example, the basic instruction for the bardo of this life is to become familiar with our minds. And the most effective way to accomplish this is through meditation. This is it, meditation. Many people today pursue meditation with no reference to the bardos. But when we inhabit the bardo view, we instinctually understand meditation as another experience of dying every day, happening right now. The transformation that occurs when we allow the conceptual mind to dissolve and for awareness to be recognized requires the death of the grasping mind. In the formal sequence of Bardo teachings, the Bardo of dying follows the Bardo of this life. But in many ways, the Bardo of dying is the Bardo of this life, as is the Bardo of becoming. All of them are really what it means to be here. The Bardo of this life includes sleep meditation, which means staying aware of what's happening as the eyes close, as the ears shut down, as the respiratory system slows, very difficult. Advanced meditators like the 16th Karmapa could rest in recognition of awareness during sleep. This is not easy. Even maintaining our recognition to the point where we black out offers immeasurable benefits. So you can do that at night. Maintain your awareness to and your recognition to the point where you black out. Although falling asleep reflects a pale version of dying, the process follows the same course of sensory decline with corresponding effects. The sense antennae stop feeding the interpretive mind. Consequently, this mind dies to its daytime role as the switchboard of our habitual misperceptions and contingent sensory reactions. We can never know for sure what will happen to us when we physically die. We can learn a lot by paying attention to our experiences of the mind that transcend the small, limited ego mind, whether these moments happen on our meditation cushions, or with unprompted glimpses of emptiness, or when falling asleep. In the mini-death of nighttime sleeping, the self cannot maintain the fiction by which it survives during the day, and we enter the unpredictable landscape of dreams. This is at night, nighttime sleeping. Sleep is the most obvious of many daily deaths, yet each micro-version of death can function as a portal through which we enter the realm of dying. Each experience of it allows us to learn about what we most dread and to diminish our fears by befriending them. With the darkening of the sky and with some mixture of optimism and denial about how sick I was, I rallied my energies for sleep meditation. He started with his eyes open. He directed his mind to the sensation of opened eyes. As the eyes started to shut, he kept awareness on sleepiness, or dullness, tiredness, and the shift of these sensations. He did not try to control the eyes or control anything. He did not try to stay awake. He just tried to stay with awareness of whatever happened. When he was close to falling asleep, he did not worry about or try to control body posture. He started to experience his body sinking, falling, weighted, falling into sleep. His lids shut. He was aware of sensation. Throughout the night, he woke repeatedly with painful cramps. Each time he struggled to get to the bushes, and each time asked himself if the Bardo of dying was really approaching. He says, I could no longer hold the thought at a distance. I was in trouble. I did not maintain consciousness as I drifted into sleep in any of the subsequent times that I dozed off. I tried sleep meditation sitting up, as we might do in the daytime, placing my shawl over my head and then lying down again. Dream images passed by, but he could not remember them. I could not recognize any of the gaps, not those in between the moment between consciousness and unconsciousness as we fall asleep, or between the breaths, or between thoughts. His mind drifted. He drank water, but wanted food. And that's the end of this chapter. So we can have a brief discussion. don't know about you, I find this very powerful stuff. I see Karen Sue nodding her head. We take our lives for granted, don't we? This is just going to continue until it doesn't. What a mystery. We're all dying. I'm 80 years old, and the older I get, the more I sleep. I sleep a lot during the day. And there's this feeling of sort of heaviness and pleasure, actually, of falling out of consciousness and into sleep. And I just wonder, is this the prefiguring of death? Is this what death is going to be like? This gentle, pleasurable loss of awareness, falling into unconsciousness. What do you think, Dan?
I was just thinking of the Big Sleep. Dashiell
Big-
Hammett. Yeah, that's what I was thinking.
The Big Sleep, I've been thinking about that title a lot.
Yeah, right.
Philip Marlowe. Big Sleep.
Yeah, Dashiell Hammett, right? Dashiell Hammett was the author. Yeah,
Who?
Dashiell Hammett was the author.
No, no.
Marlowe is a detective.
Philip Marlowe, I think, was the author, isn't it? The Big Sleep? Somebody else?
Yeah, or was Philip Marlowe the character and Dashiell Hammett was the author? Maybe, or do I have that?
I don't know. Somebody Google it. The Big Sleep. I think it was
Humphrey Bogart was in the movie, right? Yeah.
Humphrey Bogart. Yeah. Dashiell Hammett was a terrific mystery writer. Oh my God.
Yeah. I thought Marlowe
Raymond
was
Chandler.
the character. Raymond Chandler. Raymond Chandler. Yes,
Raymond
thanks.
Chandler, The Big Sleep.
Yep. Thank you. Yeah.
Great story. If
Yeah.
anyone hasn't read
I was
Dashiell Hammett's books, do. They were fabulous.
Right.
And they were made into
Right.
amazing movies with Humphrey Bogart
Yeah.
and others.
Yeah. Yeah.
Dashiell
And
Hammett.
when in the book where Mingyur Rinpoche was talking about the that was equivalent to the falling away of the earth element, right?
Yeah.
Sensation, right? Yeah. Of falling into sleep.
And we do it every night. And some of us are doing it more and more during the day. How about you, Judy? Do you do sleep during the day?
No, I don't have time.
Good for you. Yeah, because
Herb is falling on the floor.
you're taking care of Herb.
Yeah. And I'm picking him up and running the house, the garden, the home, whole shebang. But I was trying after reading those chapters to notice as I'm falling asleep, to notice those sensations. And it's interesting that you do feel, or I feel anyway, both heaviness and floating.
Yeah,
Uh,
true.
it seems like a contradiction, but there it is. Yeah, it was really fascinating. Oh, which thing was I going to talk about? Oh, the business about the self. I thought was fascinating. Which self is feeling that?
Feeling,
I I I get fed up sometimes. I just do. I can't. And I say to myself, I can't take it. I really can't. He should be in an institution of some kind where people will clean up after him. And I I thought, I just can't do this. And then I've been thinking, who is the I who just can't do this? What is the I? So interesting. It seemed to chime with Minger's um, observations on the self in these chapters.
I think you're right.
And I just recognize it. Who can't do it? Who is this I who just can't do it? And it has to be, this made up self who thinks there should be someone else to do these cleanups and so forth. Who have I assumed myself to be? Interesting.
yeah, Tom, you're right. The author of The Big Sleep is Raymond Chandler.
Another great mystery writer.
But if you haven't read Dashiell Hammett, you haven't lived.
Yeah, Judith, it sounds to me like you're getting to the heart of the matter.
Judy.
Yeah. But I think Minger and his very straightforward way of describing what he's going through is just hits me front and center without being accusatory. I think that's an amazing gift he has, his way of presenting these things and making them approachable rather than something to react to or be afraid of. He's really got the gift of teaching. Yeah. So approachable.
Yeah. I'm just amazed again and again how well he explains how we can work with these things in relation to practice.
Yeah, just simple.
Yeah, very straightforward. It's the essence of meditation is awareness.
And approachable. Oh yeah, maybe I can try and do that. Maybe when I'm falling asleep, I can notice that. And what do you know? You do. Really, really good. I'm really glad we read this book.
So for me, pain has been, and I really resonated with the passages that he spoke about and that you guys shared with us about pain. And that is that pain is really, when he talked about the actual pain, and then what I do with that pain in my mind. And my migraine pain has allowed me to understand exactly what he's talking about. And when I feel my migraine pain, I have a choice. I can say, oh, here it comes. I can write this incredibly long script about the hell that I'm going to find myself in. And I'm off to the races. Oh, darn, this is happening again. Oh, I'm not going to be able to do this. I mean, I can, I'm off to the races. Or I could say, which is what meditation and my biofeedback therapist has helped me with, is like, oh, what's that? Oh, well, maybe it wants to come in the front door and just leave out the back door. Or maybe I'm just going to be with it. Or this is going to change. Or in the best scenario, hardly acknowledging it at all. And so I'm really grateful to be reminded about what a gift. I know this sounds weird, but what a gift my pain has given me in my life, my migraine pain. So there you have it, as Judith would say.
We're almost at an end.
That's what we've been talking about.
Judy, I just think it's amazing that you can even ask that question. What is that? I can't do this, or somebody wrote something about the statement, I can't live with myself. What does that mean? I can't live with myself. What is that? I and myself, how many are there of you, right? But just that you can even see that as a question is really, I think that's just amazing.
Well, it's a tough
Yes.
road, but it has its Buddhist moments.
I've just been thinking about Dashiell Hammett. If you haven't read his books, his most famous book is The Thin Man. It was turned into a movie with Humphrey Bogart. But he had three others that were quite terrific. The Dane Curse, The Red Harvest,
The Maltese Falcon.
Maltese Falcon.
Oh, that's a famous one.
Yeah. And he was quite something, Dashiell Hammett. Handsome guy. Interesting to see his pictures. Looks like a movie. Anyhow, we're almost finished for the evening.
But we do have discussion group tomorrow night.
We do indeed. So there's your assignment. Watch a Dashiell Hammett movie. If you haven't, you won't regret it. Well, okay, shall we see the closing chat?
I guess we should.
Who's going to put it up?
I can put it up and read it.
Okay, thank you, Michael.
So let me see. Here we go. So we'll close by dedicating the merit generated through our study, practice, contemplation, discussion, for the benefit of all sentient beings. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience, may it defeat any wrongdoing, from the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great east, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom, may the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled, may all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.